Hello, welcome to PQ, the one and only Pokemon Cube podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Martin, brought to you with co-host Connor Lavelle. So now we're here with episode 11. We're in the double ones, and it's been a very busy week for P3. Hopefully you've been keeping up on the YouTube channel. We just had a video come out on Tuesday, all about Cube Koga done with Best Pal Al. So definitely check that out if you want to show some love. He did a great job explaining how the website worked. If you aren't familiar with Cube Koga, definitely go check it out. Links will be in the description. It's an amazing website for Cube. We've talked about it before in the podcast, but basically, just go check it out. CubeKoga.net. It's an amazing website if you love Cube. That's all I need to say. But Connor, how are you doing? We just started a new Cube League season, so how is that going for you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Honestly, I think this is probably one of the worst decks I've built in Cube League. I did win my first round, which was very nice. I made a couple of last-minute changes to give myself some better options, rounding out damage numbers and bumped up consistency, and they paid off very directly in the first round. So hopefully they continue to do that. I kind of think of it in the sense that if I get lucky, I can beat any deck in the league. And if I get unlucky, then I will probably lose to most decks in the league. So that's kind of where I'm at this time. How about you? How do you feel your deck is?
I was going to say, I feel the complete opposite. I feel like this is one of the best decks I've built in Cube League so far, and I lost my first round. But it was a very close round. I'm playing control, so it can be a little bit of a nuance when you're trying to deal with prizes. We got to really close game state in game 3. The only problem I had is I prized literally the 4 win conditions I had in my deck, which was Plumeria, Sableye, Chatot, and Azelf. So prizing the Azelf was a bit unfortunate because that does let me get Pokemon out of my prizes. So when I prize all of that, it is kind of hard to close out games, but I still feel very good about my deck. It is, for me, fun to play. I apologize to anyone who has to play against me, but my opponent was very nice. He had a very good deck, very good Dark Box type deck with the Dark Electro and Dark Dragonite. I hope he does very well. I really liked this streamlined game plan, but I think this cube's very cool. I really like the diversity we've seen in decks. 32 different decks now because of how many people we've had play. So there's a lot in the field, especially with a mutant cube. I feel like we've seen a lot of different play styles come out, especially because you have more options as a mutant cube. And how about that draft? If you haven't watched yet, there's a draft that we recorded on our YouTube channel that we had a ton of fun looking over. Connor, I don't know what your favorite moments of that draft was. Mine was seeing Tomo get 3 DCEs, the 2 special charge, the DCE King. That was probably one of my favorite moments. What was yours?
Yeah, so definitely the DCE moment. I swear to, and the grass stage 1s right at the end was super hype. That was like...
Oh, that was amazing.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. That was incredible. Trying to figure out what Mike was doing, that was also a lot of fun. And just kind of seeing how the decks played out, because a couple of people definitely just like got onto an archetype and then they were on that archetype the whole time. But a lot of people stayed open and they kind of felt out the waters and then they moved on to something. And some people also had to pivot from what they started out in. So I thought lots of interesting things were going on in that draft, and there were definitely some very skillful things that went on, and lots to talk about and lots to look at. So definitely recommend that if you haven't watched the video already. Just very neat to see how these players think and how they draft.
Yeah, that's always my favorite part, is seeing from like a fly on the wall's perspective how these players are drafting, how they're going about their situation that they're in. This is one of the coolest parts about draft itself, is you have to think on the fly. So okay, you see everyone's personality comes out. But if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. There were some great moments in there, and honestly, not to do my homework, some really great moments to like talk about Cube and probably some insight from both Connor and I's perspective. So definitely give it a listen. It's probably one of the favorite drafts I've seen in a long time. But I do have to ask though, what was your approach going into your draft, Connor, as you were approaching this mutant cube? I know you've done a ton of research on it and a ton of draft games on it. I mean, I haven't done as many as you have. You've played this game up to 5 times, I think. So you've had a lot of preparation. I was curious how you went into this draft, with what mindset.
Yeah, the league was the 6th time I've drafted this. So definitely did a lot more preparation this time than I had done in the past, partially because I was just having a lot of fun. I enjoyed playing it every time. So yeah, I played it a lot, and I had a lot of preparation, a lot of thoughts coming in. I really was valuing powerful stage 1s. Whether those be consistency cards, especially stage 1 EXs, I think are so powerful in this cube, a lot of them. Things like Raichu EX or really both Raichu EXs, but especially the one with like Rai Shield, I think it's called, that snipes. Manectric EX. Lightning was one of the types that I was definitely the highest on coming in because of the insane aggression you could put out with the stage 1s. So I was on high alert for like Medicham EX, Hariyama EX, Manectric Raichu, things like that. And I did actually start off on Lightning because I think I started with like an early Raichu EX, and I was like, oh, this is awesome, yeah. But I didn't see a lot of the stuff that I wanted to see alongside it, and I was definitely still staying open. Like this cube, it's really important to do that. And I ended up going for, so I saw Salamence EX from Deoxys, and it was one of my favorite cards in the test games. I think it's one of the best stage 2s, so I ended up moving on to that and using this kind of double acceleration strategy. So in my experience, kind of the ways that you win this cube are you have a very strong tempo advantage and you carry that through to the late game. Or you set up very reliably, you set up a powerful combo of like acceleration and big time attacker, and you take one shots on decks that can't one shot you back. And those are kind of the two ways that I was trying to win. Those were the two successful means to a victory that I had seen so far. And I started off going for the first one, and I ended up going for the second one. So my deck ended up being this big, large acceleration, one-shotty kind of deck. And I think it's not a bad deck. It's just not one of the better decks that I've personally drafted, especially for the league. But it's a very interesting cube, and there's a lot. I feel like every single time I draft it, I learn a lot. And for Cube League, I feel like I learned a lot again, but not as much as in the past. The deck that I was able to put together was definitely one that I had kind of established. Like, this is a viable and powerful deck, and this is how I can execute it better than I've executed it before. But it was a doozy. it was a very tough draft. Didn't go great for me. But I'm hoping that I salvaged it well enough to at least make top 8.
Yep, I'm right there with you. Of course, I'm sorry the 0-1 never feels great, but I mean, I feel confident enough that hopefully, I can bounce back. I know for me, it was like if I see Bunnelby and Chat.G, I'm sending it, and I unpacked Bunnelby pack 1, and I got past the Chat pack 3, so here we are. That's all I really wanted to see to play Control. So, usually I don't really go into drafts with that kind of mindset. It's usually more of a drafting the hard way, in quotes, trying to just take what the draft brings you. But in this instance, I really felt good about Control, and knowing that Control is commonly underdrafted, felt like I had enough means to go for it. So ultimately, we'll see how it pans out. I'm very excited to play more games. Definitely going to try to keep everyone updated on our records. You can definitely find mine on my Twitter at PKCube. I have a post where you can find my deck list as well as my round results. But of course, as you're listening to the podcast, you'll be updated on our results as well. Anything else to cover on Cube League in general before we move on? Just wanted to make sure everyone got everyone to say.
So I know we're about to talk about the upcoming schedule for the week, but I am super not looking forward to trying to make power rankings out of this cube. This is going to be nightmarish. Decks are very good. They're very hard to evaluate. Yeah, I don't know, man. This is going to be tough.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good segue. So this Friday, so the day tomorrow, if you're listening to this on the 6th, I had to check my date. There is going to be live power rankings on our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/P3podcast, where Connor and I and all the other admins from the Discord are going to be ranking their top 5 decks. If you haven't seen our previous power rankings and want to get a feel for what it's all about, definitely check that out. The video of that is on our YouTube channel. But this Friday at 5 p.m. Central, we'll be live talking about basically the 5 decks that we all feel were the best decks in the league. So like Connor said, it's going to be very difficult. I know for me, I'm having to do a lot more research on this cube in particular, just because there's so many decks, so many strategies. It's really hard to evaluate each one. And I know every other person's in the same boat. So it'll be interesting to see what decks we all pick. Of course, we don't really talk about it beforehand, so we're all going to go into it with this blind mindset, which is what you'd want. So should be interesting. I mean, I definitely echo your thoughts, Connor. It's hard on myself as well. I have not been able to make a clear cut on the best 5.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just going to be tricky. It's going to be a ton of fun, I'm sure, so definitely keep an eye out for it. It'll be this weekend, but it's going to be... I imagine we'll have some very different decks on our top 5, if not very different opinions as well.
Yeah, that is the hope. And so there's a lot of stuff going on this week, like I said. This Saturday at 12 p.m. Central, we will be hosting a live stream of Kyle Stukovich's Chaos Cube. So we'll be drafting and we'll be playing it. If you haven't heard of that, that cube is, by definition, the most chaotic cube we've ever seen. It is entirely all one lines. It's all singleton. So it's just it seems like just a huge like puzzle or mess or whatever you want to call it of trying to find what line you're actually gonna be able to play, because you'll have no idea if someone drafted your line, or if you can even find like if you have a stage 2 line, you have no idea if someone has your stage 1. So it should lead to all sorts of chaotic messes here. It should be a ton of fun. We're actually going to be joined with all the other admins from the Discord, as well as Odysseus from the Discord and Omnipoke. So we have a lot of great cube players also to the table. So it should be a ton of fun. Connor, what are you looking forward to the chaotic mess that we all get ourselves into?
Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing. I'm super, super excited for it. I think it's going to be absolute madness.
Yeah, so you can watch it all live on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/B3podcast at 12 p.m. this Saturday. So hope you guys tune in. If not, you can check the YouTube channel and VODs will come up later throughout the week. So that's kind of it for announcements. I guess now we should get into our Cracker Pack, which we're going to divert just for this week and actually do a pack from this Chaos Cube, just so you guys can see what we're getting ourselves into for this week. So, Connor, do you have a pack pulled up that we can look at?
I do indeed. So this is a really interesting pack. I'm excited to talk about it. It is a 10-card pack. The first card is Meganium Prime, then Zoroark from Black and White with Foul Play, and then Celebi Prime, Bridget, Malamar with Psychic Recharge, Galarian Ponyta, Swordward and Shieldbert, which I did not know was a card until I saw it in this pack, Vespiquen from Ancient Origins, Power Tree, the stadium card that allows you to get basic energy back from your discard if you have no specials in your discard, and a weakness guard energy. So, Andrew, what jumps out to you in this pack?
So, we already had some deliberation before this, but it's really weird to find cards that you want to take in this pack, in this cube even, because, like I said, it's all one lines or 1/1 lines, so it makes it difficult to say, okay, I'm playing the Vespiquen, I'm playing the Zoroark, I'm playing the Meganium. That said, let me just unpack this a little bit, my thought process, because I'm still working through it. I haven't really spent a ton of time thinking about this cube. The stage 2 lines are sketchy. They're always going to be sketchy. So that Meganium it's neat, but like the problem with it is that, again, it's a 1/1 line, so it's really hard card to say, okay, I'm building around it. The next cards I'm looking at are the Zoroark, the Malamar, and the Vespiquen, because they're all fantastic stage 1s. Specifically, the Zoroark and the Vespiquen are amazing attackers. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Be Revenge and Foul Play. I mean, they're very efficient, like energy cost as well. My only problem with them, and in comparison to the Malamar, which is the card I would take from this pack, is that the Malamar, if I get the Inkay, I don't need anything else to pair with the Malamar. The Malamar is just good on its own. The Zoroark and the Vespiquen both need sort of build-arounds, because Foul Play isn't really a deck, and Be Revenge is a deck. You can definitely build a deck around Be Revenge, but without the combi, you have no idea what that deck does, or if that deck's even coming together. And the combi in this cube has an insane, I guess what you call it, an ability. It's more like an ancient trait, that it pulls back Pokemon from the discard pile. So you don't even need the Vespiquen to have justification for the combi. So with that all said, I really like the Malamar. I really like energy acceleration in general. And while you're not guaranteed to get the basic, I think in the context of, drafting the hard way and trying to stay open, I think the Malamar gives you the most options. And also it just makes your deck quality a lot higher if in fact you get the Inkay. So that's where I'm leaning. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, or if you're even eyeing up maybe the Bridget or anything.
So I think you could reasonably take 6 cards out of this pack. And I would not look at you funny if you took 6. So the 4 cards that I would not take are Meganium Prime. It's a stage 2, which is going to be hard to put together already, and I don't think it's that powerful in context with the cube. Swordward and Shieldbert. I mean, it's a draw 3. It's not worth it. Power Tree. It's not something that I want to commit to this early, and even if I have a deck that uses it really well, it's only going to be okay. And Weakness Guard Energy. Now, Weakness Guard Energy might be a better card than I'm giving it credit for. However, I imagine that Weakness Guard Energy will probably not be that good because you'll probably be playing a lot of types in your deck, because everything is a 1/1 line. So the cards that I would take. Zoroark from Black and White, Foul Play, one of the most powerful and versatile attacks ever. Even though you can't build a deck around it, you can play it in anything, and very, very strong. Zorua is probably not a card that's going to see a ton of competition, so most likely you'll be able to complete that line if you have the topper. Celebi Prime, it's a basic energy accelerator, which I feel is very, very valuable in this cube. If you get it pack 1, it's going to be very easy to get ways to get it out of the active all the time, so you can get lots of Forest Breaths off. So, very powerful card. Bridget, nice consistency piece. I probably wouldn't take the Bridget out of all these 5 cards that I'm mentioning, just because there are going to be other consistency pieces, but there are not going to be other examples of these Pokemon. So interesting to say that. But if you do want to just stay totally open, which I would say, pack 1, pick 1, no matter what you pick, you're going to be open. But if you do want something that's going to go into your deck in the end, no matter what, Bridget, very strong card. Malamar, I think Malamar is probably the strongest pick in the pack, with the caveat that if people see Inkay, a lot of the time they will probably take Inkay because Malamar is so good. And having the chance of taking Malamar, or having the chance of getting Malamar in your deck is very good. However, I may be overestimating the rate at which people are able to take Inkay, so Malamar is probably the strongest pick in the pack. Just, stage 1 energy acceleration, crazy strong. Galarian Ponyta, I actually think is a valid pick because Galarian Rapidash is one of the strongest stage 1s in the cube. The attack 2 for 30 plus 30 for each energy on your opponent's active. A lot of the time you're going to be dealing like 90 to 150 damage to a stage 2 for 2 energy, which is crazy good. So Galarian Rapidash, very good card. In addition, Galarian Ponyta, probably a pretty safe pick. Galarian Rapidash, I don't foresee going super fast. So if you have the Ponyta, you probably have a solid shot at getting the Rapidash as well, as long as it's not open like on the other side of the table. Vespiquen from Ancient Origins, very, very powerful attacker. And the concern that I have with it is the Combee that's in the cube is the one with Honey, which is a very good card and is a basic recovery card. And as a result, you might not actually get your line, because I imagine recovery is extremely valuable in a cube where you only have one of any of your cards. So would not be that confident I could actually complete the Vespiquen line, but in a vacuum, amazing attacker. So those are kind of my thoughts. I wouldn't fault you for taking those 6 cards, and I could see any of them being the right pick with some more cube knowledge.
Yeah, I think what's tricky is the underlying part of it is okay, like the Combee, for instance, is something you have to think about is how likely is someone going to be to take that card. You have to evaluate your odds of getting the basic. I actually am between the Malamar and the Ponyta after thinking about it, because Ponyta is a very sneaky pick, and maybe it's not after talking about it, but
yeah, we've ruined it.
But that's I think that's the thought process you need for a cube like this. I think you do need a little bit of luck to get the cards you need for your line, but you do want to sort of play mind games and think about what are people not going to be interested in, or what are people undervaluing. So that could be a very sneaky way of getting into a really solid attacker pretty safely. So I think I'm still going to take the Malamar because Psychic Recharge, if I can play a deck with Psychic Recharge in it, I feel like it's going to be great no matter what. So I'd rather just have that. And if I get into an Inkay, I'm sure I'm going to have this decision pretty much every pack. So Malamar is a very solid card to start off with, and go from there. But yeah, I could definitely see taking Ponyta, which is funny because usually we aren't really hyping up the evolving basic of a pack, but in this case it is honestly a really good door to getting some great attackers going. So that's pretty cool. I like what this cube has pretty much changed the value of cards completely.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I think my top 2 would be the Celebi and the Malamar, just because Celebi is a card that naturally benefits from being picked early because you can pick lots of enablers that allow you to, give it for your treat, and then you can get lots and lots of use out of it. It's kind of a one-stop shop. You have the Celebi, you have acceleration. That's it. You don't actually have to worry about a basic. Whereas Malamar, stronger effect, but bigger asterisk on whether or not it actually is able to be played in your deck by the end. So those are probably my top two, but I could see a lot of discussion around this pack.
Yeah, so we would love to hear your guys' opinions and thoughts on this pack in the comment section. We got a lot of feedback on the last pack that we showed with the mutant cube, which we'll be back to in the next episode. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on this cube or this pack, definitely let us know, because we're also still figuring it out as we go. We might not even have it figured out after next week. So definitely give us a shout and let us know what you guys think. And if this seems chaotic enough right here, if you want to watch an entire draft done by 8 experienced Cube players who are going to be very much at the edge of their seat trying to find their cards, check us out 12 p.m. Saturday, where we'll be drafting this cube live. So yep, I think that's all we really need to cover here. Connor, do you have anything before we go into our main segment?
No, I think I'm good. I'm very excited for this topic. I'm ready to get into it.
Right. I am as well. So we're going to be transitioning into our main segment now. We'll be back in just a second. All right, welcome back to this main segment. So today, we said we're going to be talking about DCE. So I'm going to let Connor go ahead and start this one off, because this has been a topic he's been really wanting to talk about since we started the podcast. So go ahead, Connor, take it away.
Yeah, so DCE is a card that I have seen a lot of people discuss, a lot of people kind of take for granted. Some people even say things to the effect of, DCE is like a staple card. I don't think any of these things are necessarily true. And I think people's familiarity with DCE has kind of changed their perception of it in a similar way that it might be the case with Ultra Ball. But even more so with DCE. So I wanted to talk about it, wanted to talk about where it is in Cube, and even go into a little bit of the history of the card, which kind of leads people to maybe have certain perspectives on it going into a Cube that might not be exactly how it should be viewed. So Andrew, what's your perspective on DCE? You started around the Sun and Moon era, so what kind of perspective do you come in with?
Yeah, so I started early 2017, so right when Sun and Moon Base came out. Yeah, when I came to the game, DCE was, well, it was reprinted, but it was already in the format. So, I mean, I've seen it played in tons of decks, but I guess my perspective on DCE would be, I mean, it's very aggressive, makes decks very fast and very consistent, because the one downside with decks that can't utilize DCE is that you have to run multiple energy cards to supplement the attack costs, which is more familiar, I mean, to current standard, and like if you think when tag teams came out. So I mean, I've kind of had both, like formats with DCE and then formats without DCE being fairly prevalent. So I mean, I think the card can be very I don't know what the right word is, polarizing in the wrong context. So if maybe a format has just a really efficient attackers that can utilize DCE, maybe it becomes too warping for those decks. But I don't know. I've seen like a balance of it go back and forth. And I think right now, especially looking at expanded, like DCE makes some decks really good, but then other decks that, have good draw engines or have good acceleration engines tend to do just fine. So I don't know. I'm kind of like, it's a card. I mean, it's a card like anything else. As long as it's like in the appropriate format, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a pretty well-rounded perspective on it for sure. So just a couple of notes on DCE in history and things that I think influence people's opinions about it going into Cube, maybe even subconsciously. So DCE was most recently reprinted for the first time in 2010 in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And since then, it's been essentially a game-defining aspect of every format that it's been in. And current expanded is the least prevalent that DCE has ever been since it's been legal. At least to my knowledge, to both my recollection and my reading and research, there has never been a time where DCE was legal and not played in Tier 1 decks. However, a couple of things. It wasn't present for a large portion of the game's history. So from Neo Genesis until Platinum Arceus, which is about 10 years, DCE was not actually in the game at all. And as a result, there were a lot of cards that were printed in that era that were not designed with DCE in mind. And DCE is very, very powerful with that you see in different cubes, and we will get into that more in the future. But I think a lot of the people that are playing the game right now have started within the last 10 years because that's a pretty reasonable span of time, I think, to be with a game. And because of that, people are very used to DCE, they're very familiar with it, and it's kind of like a core part of the game, but that's not necessarily the case. And that kind of leads into some thoughts that I've had for a while on DCE's place in Cube, whether you should include it at all even, and then how much you should prioritize it in your draft, because it does vary a lot. DCE, even though it's such a universal card, even though it's so well known, is not a card that should go into every single deck. It's not a card that you should always take highly, if at all, but it sometimes is one of the best things you can possibly take. So, Andrew, what have your experiences been as far as DCE in Cube, and how you've prioritized it, maybe, or how you've seen other people prioritize it?
I mean, I think you definitely raised one of the best points, is that it definitely depends on the cube, because you can't just have DCE being like, you can't always assume DCE is gonna be the best card in every cube, because it always is gonna depend on what can utilize it. Personally, I feel like DCE tends to be not necessarily a trap, but I feel like cube builders tend to over prioritize it in their cubes. Like I often see people over like basically just like put too much of it in their cube, or like, I don't know. Like I feel like for sometimes there's not enough lines to utilize it. I tend to see like 4 to 6 copies of it, but it really wouldn't make sense. It's like I said, it's just a card. I mean, like, it's a good card, don't get me wrong, and like I'm sure as this whole episode unfolds, I mean, it's obviously it's going to matter what you pair with it, but like I don't think you necessarily need to put like a ton of it in your cube and expect it to be, a centric part of every deck. I also think it also can be it can be that. It can be a warping presence, especially if like the best attackers in the cube utilize DCE as an attack. So I mean, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it be a fairly underwhelming card and a fairly overwhelming card at the same time. So it really just depends on context. I feel like personally, it should be a card you should be thinking about when you're building your lines, but also it shouldn't be something where you need to prioritize putting like a whole bunch of copies in it without, really much context. Now, if that's what you want your cube to do, I mean, that's fine, but with a grain of salt, you should be considering maybe other cards as with it as well, like maybe Double Rainbow or stuff like that. So I mean, that's my perspective. I think it needs balance, but I tend to see it be overutilized more than under, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. People tend to take it very highly. People tend to put very high counts of it in their cube just because it's a card that they're accustomed to. And, just like powerful supporters and that kinds of thing, they see DCE as a staple, as a necessity. But I want to make a very firm point here in that I do not think DCE is a mandatory card for Cube. It's not a staple. It's not a card that you need to put in. And usually it's not going to define anything. It's not required to play the game like supporters are. You can't build a cube without supporters. It'd be miserable. It's not important like Pokemon lines, that you also need to play the game. So it's not in that staple tier that I think a lot of cube builders regard it in. So, and this can kind of be a lesson to expand past just DCE. If you have thoughts about, cards that you absolutely must have in your cube, then try dropping them. Obviously don't drop your entire supporter line, but like, maybe you think of Sycamore as a card that you absolutely must put in your cube for consistency. Try dropping it and putting in something else. You may be very surprised how consistency lines adapt, how it changes the tempo and the cadence of your cube, but you will very likely not see it ruin your cube. So if you're ever looking for something subtle to change that may actually have a fairly significant effect, try things like that. Try dropping cards or not including cards in your cube that you think are mandatory. However, that said, it is very, very commonly featured in cubes. I have seen cubes recently that don't include it. However, I would say most do. And that's where we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of what makes double colorless energy powerful. When will you need to prioritize it more? When is it not as big a deal? When is it just okay? And when it should be the number one card in your pack. So the reason we wanted to talk about this, and we have mentioned this already, but the reason we wanted to talk about this is because it's been such a big topic of discussion in the Discord lately, with the current cube DCE being one of the most single powerful cards there is. So this topic is really topical at the moment, and we wanted to kind of go into it because it was an idea that I had even before this cube fired. So.
Yeah, I know this has been on our topic bucket list for quite some time, so
yeah,
it's only a matter of time before we got to it.
Definitely. So, at its core, what makes double colorless energy powerful is that it's the most versatile acceleration in the game. You can play it directly from your hand, no other requirements. There are no requirements on the Pokemon, like not with double rainbow energy or scramble, something like that. There's no type requirement. It literally just comes down from your hand and it's 2 energy instantly. It is the second most powerful acceleration, only to Rain Dance. Rain Dance can get tons and tons of energy in play. You could say that it's less powerful than some of the more powerful bench accelerators like Electric or something, but a lot of the time, a double colorless energy, and you can see this in the history of Standard as well, in formats where Electric and Malamar have existed alongside double colorless energy, there have been plenty of decks that just use double colorless energy and no other accelerators because it is such a powerful effect. Being able to play more than one energy from your hand with no other facilitator or enabler is an incredibly powerful effect. So that's one thing to think about. At its core, that's why DCE is good, because it buys you time, it makes you attack faster, and it doesn't require anything. There are no stipulations on double colorless energy at all. However, there are some limitations on its usefulness. So you have to think about, so kind of these 4 things are the things that I think of, and after I'm done, Andrew, definitely throw yours in as well. What Pokemon can use it? So if you have a bunch of Pokemon with, maybe fighting colorless requirement, or even triple fighting requirement, or 3 colored energy, 2 colored energy, and a colorless requirement, DCE is not a good card. You don't gain any tempo out of it. It's not any better than a basic energy because you're not fulfilling any multiple colorless energy requirements. So that's number 1. Number 2 is what acceleration options exist. If acceleration is very prevalent and very powerful in the cube that you're playing, double colorless energy is not going to be nearly as powerful because you're going to have lots and lots of other options, and oftentimes it's not actually going to buy you a turn or 2 attacking faster than your opponent. How many are there? So this is much less important than the first 2 factors. The first 2 factors are definitely the guiding ones, but if there are a lot of DCE in a cube, then you can reasonably expect that your opponents are going to be playing them, and you will probably need to respond with some of your own. On the flip side, if there are very few of them, then it can be a very powerful asset when used right because your opponent won't have it, but it's not needed. You are able to get away with not playing it. You can be a little bit slower because your opponents are probably going to be slower as well. So at that point, DCE would just be an advantage, and it wouldn't be as important to your strategy. And then how much competition is there for it? So DCE as a 1-of is a very different card than it is as a 3 or 4-of. You can build your deck around the energy in a different way if you have 3 or 4 of them, and you can get them reliably, than if you're going to be fighting people for them and you only get 1. And that can change very, very much. It just depends on the cube. But generally, JL's cube, there's a ton of competition for DCE, so you're not really going to be able to build your deck around it until after you already get them. And we did see a couple of decks do that. They did get very lucky on their DCE pulls. But in general, people aren't able to do that. People had to look for other options. However, in a cube where DCE is not as powerful, where lots of lines can't use it, maybe there are only a couple of Pokemon that actually take good advantage of it, then you can start to plan your deck around having double colorless energy and take it higher than the other people at the table. Maybe it's a 6th pick normally and you take it 3rd, something to that effect. You can build a deck with significantly more of them, and then you can start to leverage that. An example being, I had an Electivire deck in the, I think, June Cube League or July, where the whole idea was that I wanted to use Electro Wave on turn 2 which deals 30 damage to your opponent's entire bench. And one of the ways that I aimed to do that was with double colorless energy. And one of the only reasons that actually worked is because there weren't as many people competing for double colorless energy. A lot of the line toppers couldn't make good use of it. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it is definitely something that you can account for and build toward in your drafting. Andrew, are there any other things that you consider when assessing how powerful DCE is in a cube?
I mean, I think it's definitely the core foundation of what you should be looking at. Definitely, like, the landscape of what Pokemon can use it and, like, how contested I am for it is definitely huge. I'm also definitely curious to see, like, what type of recovery options do we have for it. So is there a special charge in the cube? Is there any way I can reasonably get this energy back? Especially if my deck's centered around attacking with DC, that would be something I would want to know in advance, that if I can find ways to recover it, that's even better. Of course, it's still good even if you can't. I mean, as Connor already said, like, you already can attack quicker. You're already removing an extra colorless requirement off your attack. It makes cards a lot better with that added aspect, even without the recovery. But it's something I definitely would want to see. Also, the type of removal in the cube. So if there's a lot of energy denial in the cube, let's just say there's just like a lot of Enhanced Hammer, or maybe there's a lot of Fabas, or Flare Grunt, or that kind of thing. Now, people don't necessarily play those cards in their deck, but they might if there is a high contention for DC. So something we've seen in JL's cube is that, like, cards like Enhanced Hammer or POW or those kind of cards have a higher value because they combat one of the strongest cards in the cube. So that's something you got to look out for. You got to consider, okay, do I want to commit to a strategy where I could potentially be losing a lot of energy every turn? Because it can be pretty devastating if you are planning on attacking every turn and then 2 energies gets knocked off your Pokemon. You're then set back even farther than you were before. So those are things I like to consider and think about. And really the thought process there for me is, do I have an alternate strategy to deal with that kind of pressure? Or do I have a way to keep my tempo up if DC gets discarded? Because I feel like that's something we don't see a lot. And I honestly am surprised we don't see enough in decks like in the Mutant Cube, where energy denial seems to be one of the hugest things, at least from my perspective, that can really lopside a game. So if you're committing to a DC centric strategy, or like you're thinking, okay, I want to get this attack off early, unless you are completely locking your opponent out of the game with that card, you have to consider what happens if this card goes away. So that's something I like to think about too, is what's the price of me losing the DCE off my Pokemon? Like, can I recover from that?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very, very good thing to think about. You know, if you lose a DCE or 2, maybe you need to use one to retreat, and you have an Enhanced Hammer hit one. Is your deck gonna be very slow and not strong, or are you still gonna be okay? Are you gonna be able to recover those, or do you have plenty of options that don't need it? So that's very good to think about as well. So those are all things that kind of go into the evaluation of double colorless energy. And now I kind of want to move into examples and illustrate exactly what this means, and examples of DCE in the wild and how it's been more powerful, how it's been less powerful.
Can I say one thing before we do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So something also that has me thinking about is just, this is mostly from a cube building perspective, is, you know, the stuff we just outlined and how influential the card is. I think when you're designing your lines and you're making your cube, you should be evaluating DCE pretty critically on the things we just outlined, as in the Pokemon that can use it, the acceleration, the quantity, and, you know, how contested you think the card will be. Because what you do not want in your cube is for this card to basically control what decks are and aren't tier 1. And that's not necessarily any of the cubes that we're going to list here, but that is something that I have seen happen before. It's happened in my No cube, it's happened in others I've seen it. It happens more often than you think. So definitely, as a cube, for the cube builders out there, really pay attention to this card and see how many decks it really defines in your cube, and maybe use that as a signal to say, okay, maybe this card's too good, or maybe I need to ratchet it back. And you can evaluate basically on the criteria that we've just outlined, and hopefully, and with the examples we're about ready to provide. So that was just a perspective I wanted to throw out there. Just another side to this, as far as it relates to cube, is definitely the building perspective and how DCE changes the landscape of your cube itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important to think about, and something that can be very easy to overlook, for sure. But going into some examples. So the number one that I wanted to talk about, and one of the motivators for doing this episode to begin with, was JL and Mike's Delta Mutant Cube. It is the current Cube League. It's an excellent cube, very well balanced, lots of very powerful strategies. And double colorless energy has become one of the strongest cards in the cube, if not the single strongest card in the cube. And that's because every single line uses it. And this is going to be a really common thing with mutant cubes in general. It's that you have lots of Pokemon, lots of opportunities to get value out of this 2 colorless energy attack costs. You know, lots of Pokemon in the history of the game have had those attack requirements, so it's significantly less limiting than it would be if you had a conventional evolution chain that was maybe heavy on colored energy requirements, and that's just how it is. So lots more opportunities to use double colorless energy in Mutant. But in this case, every single line uses it. Every single color type uses double colorless energy excellently. They have, I would say, at least half of the attackers in the cube. Andrew, would you say that's about right? Maybe even more?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fair bit. I mean, you guys can look for yourselves. We'll have the link to all these cubes in the description, as if they are on CubeCoga, of course. But yeah, it seems like in JL and Mike's cube, DC tends to find itself in pretty much any deck it really can find it. It really can work in. And that's just because there's a lot of just colorless requirements that are, I mean, pretty much mitigated by DCE. So it makes a lot of decks a lot stronger with it in there.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing, and this is something that I probably should have talked about before with how we assess it. Tempo in this cube is very, very important. Games are won on a razor's edge, extremely thin margins. A lot of the time it goes down to the prize. It's very back and forth. Being able to burst 2 energy from your hand and take a knockout, or put some early pressure on the opponent, or respond to your opponent knocking out your fully set up attacker a turn faster than you normally would be able to is incredibly powerful. I know an example from my match this league, actually. So I went turn 1 attach an energy, turn 2 attach a Holin's Pokemon and evolve into a Furret from one of the e-reader sets. And that Furret can shuffle 2 cards from your hand into your deck, and it can search your deck for any energy. So even with just 1 DCE, I was able to, the next turn, evolve into Salamence EX from Deoxys after searching my deck for a double colorless energy with Furret, attach that double colorless energy, and now I can swing for 120 damage and kill anything my opponent sets up on turn 3. So that is an extremely powerful case for double colorless, and it's just one example of very, very many, especially when there are opportunities to search for it, to recover it, things like that. There are more opportunities to get it in play and use it when it's most effective, and that's when you can really see exactly what double colorless energy is doing to a game. So things like that for it. But then when we were watching the draft, there was a player, Tomo, who got 3 of them. And he got 2 special charge as well. And then his deck literally became, I'm going to draft as many powerful attackers that have a 2 colorless energy requirement as possible. And watching him do that was awesome. I think you enjoyed that as well, Andrew.
Yeah, that was pretty incredible.
But it really just completely warped the way that his deck was built, and it's going to warp the way that his games play out as well. I do know he lost his first round. I don't know exactly how that went, but just something very interesting to note. And what have your experiences been kind of in this cube with double colorless energy?
So yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of cards coming in and out of the cube. I know Dragonite EX, the Delta, was a really good card with DCE. I know when I drafted it, that card having to be able to use Deafen in early turns is just mind blowing. It's no longer in the cube, but that was definitely one of the cards that could definitely use it to its full effect. And we've seen other cards like this too. I mean, like the colorless line in particular has a lot of good Pokemon that can utilize it, like the Salamence EX, which Connor has, or the Slaking that shuts off all Poke Powers with Lazy and then has the critical move. I mean, that's like just be able to launch these huge attacks for 4 energies for just like only 3 attachments can be so crazy, especially in something like Tomo's deck where he has 2 access to 3 DC in his deck. So you can just think, okay, a 4 energy attack cost would be pretty hefty, but that can be set up in a matter of 2 turns. So you can definitely see how DCE would find itself into many decks with that kind of power on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an example of DCE being very strong. Not necessarily so strong it should be removed, but very, very strong. So I want to skip forward in our show notes a little bit to a cube where it's just kind of average. Like, it's just okay. DCE is a fine card. You don't take it very highly, but some decks can make good use of it, and that is a cube we talked about before, I'm sure, Slower Car 42's Low Power Cube. So in that cube, like I said, pretty average card. I'm definitely not eager to take it. Might take it like pick 6 to 8 if I have a specific deck that uses it well. It's nice acceleration for a few decks. The decks that have 2 colorless energy, Shiftry, I would really like it in, just because you have lots of options on that line. But in general, most decks are gonna need like pretty heavy requirements of colored energy. Some need entirely colored energy, things like Lugia EX. I'm probably not even going to play DCE in a deck that's got Lugia or trying to facilitate Lugia. The speed advantage in that cube is not as big a deal. It's a fairly slow cube. People take some time to set up. You're generally not going to be under the gun. You don't need to be able to respond very quickly or apply pressure immediately with double colorless energy. That doesn't mean it's not useful because, your opponent is also expecting a slower pace. If you get on them faster, then that can be a great advantage for you. However, if they're able to respond to it, then DCE didn't really gain you a ton of presence there either. So it really depends. The speed advantage there is not as big of a deal. And because of that, you don't need to be as fast. You can take more time to set your board up and do something that is more powerful in the mid to late game compared to just shelling out damage as fast as possible. So, Andrew, do you have any other cubes that you think is just kind of average or even not that great in?
So at like the top of my head, I can't quite think of that many. But any cube that kind of falls into that line where like most of the attackers are multicolored energy or are going to take like those type of steps, DC definitely becomes less of a valued card. If really only like 1 or 2 lines can utilize it and it's not even that great, then you definitely don't take DC as quite as soon as you would in something like the mutant cube. So I've drafted slower cards cube before. I definitely agree. The decks are designed to be at a slower tempo, so you have more turns to develop a strategy. DC doesn't really work within those lines, so honestly, it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of an expectation that, okay, I'm not just gonna get obliterated on turn 2 because someone popped off with a DCE. So that can create a little bit more skillful gameplay, in my opinion. So something to think about. Definitely, it changes the dynamic for sure. Decks definitely react differently without that access to something like DCE. So I'd say slower cards. Cube is definitely an example of just sort of an average use of it. Nothing crazy, but it's still fairly decent if your deck can utilize it well. So I agree though with everything you said before though with how the decks work within that cube.
Yeah, definitely. And then the third cube that I want to talk about with it is a cube I believe it was removed from. It may have just been excluded from initially because of the power level, but I'm fairly certain it was removed. And that's the Gen 7 All-Stars cube built by Vent that we played for the last Cube League. So that cube was, very modern cube. There were tons of attackers using it, and some of the most powerful attackers in the cube were using it. So things like Sylvally GX and really just tons of stuff, tons and tons of stuff would be able to take advantage of the double colorless energy, and the speed advantage in that cube was everything. Andrew, how many turns would you say the average game in that cube was?
So that cube was definitely it was pretty fast because you'd have, especially if your deck is more GX centric, I'd say like probably if not half the amount of turns you're gonna get in this current cube. So maybe close to 10 or less. Of course, the one price decks take a little bit more time, but generally not a lot of turns you have to really develop your board. So, and that's kind of true in most high power or this kind of thing where if the attackers are set up by like turn 2 or 3, you have to be ready to respond in an instant. So that's where DCE really does shine, and that is why it was removed from this cube, is because the decks that had it were at an inherent advantage because you had the quick response or you were dealing the first attack every time. So that's definitely a good benchmark for if DC is too strong. It's definitely when those things are happening. If you're attacking big on turn 2, or if the attacks you're doing with DCE are taking huge knockouts out of nowhere, it can be really game defining in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say on average, games in that cube lasted about 7 turns. Some of them were shorter, some of them were longer, but on average, probably about 7 turns. The You literally accelerate your game plan by like 16% by playing a double colorless energy at any point in there. Like if you buy an entire turn, you bought a whole turn out of like 7, and that's just insane. So like Andrew said, that was an example of a cube where DCE was far too powerful, and it did end up being removed because it was being played with lots and lots of cards, and just a single double colorless energy would create such a lopsided advantage in games that was almost impossible to come back from. So with that, that's basically what we've got for Double Colorless Energy today. Not quite as long of an episode as usual, very specific topic, but we will move into our conclusion now shortly and give you an update on kind of the things that are going on this weekend and in the near future, and give you the update on what's new. So stick around.
Hello and welcome back to our conclusion segment. So a lot shorter of an episode this time around, but I feel like as long as it's still an insightful episode, the length is less of an issue. Hopefully, it works both ways. So, but I mean, it feels good to talk about like more of the nitty gritty parts of Q. I feel like we've kind of gotten away from that in a few episodes. Not that we haven't had good topics to talk about, but this I feel like was very much game mechanic specific. Wouldn't you say, Connor?
Yeah, definitely.
But with that said, it's been a very exciting week for us. We hit 80 subscribers on YouTube, so thank you to everybody who's been listening on there, as well as people who've been listening on Spotify. A very consistent growth there too, which has been really, really nice to see the amount of positive feedback we've received on the podcast in general, especially being 11 episodes in. It's kind of hard to believe we were still doing this 11 episodes later. I mean, January feels like forever ago when we started this, but thank you for all the love out there. It means a lot. Especially from, all the people who've been in the Discord, letting us know like how much they appreciate it. It really does mean a lot. It goes a long way. So wanted to say thank you to everybody for the support there. And we plan to keep on going. We plan to keep up in the ante and producing more content. So part of an effort to do that is obviously the 2 live streams happening this weekend. So on Friday, just to reiterate what we said in the intro, is that we have the Power Rankings on Friday at 5 p.m. Central, and then the Chaos Cube live stream Saturday at 12 p.m. If you want to keep track of those dates, I highly recommend following us on Twitter at PKMNCube Podcast. The link will be in the description. So we're going to utilize the Twitter a lot more in terms of when there's new stuff coming up or we have lots of planned. We're going to be posting a lot on there. So if you have a Twitter and you want to keep up with the podcast, definitely recommend following us because we're going to be a lot more active. We're also going to be posting a lot more Cube League updates, not just for ourselves, but for the whole league itself. Try to highlight some of the best decks. Really, stuff we can't really talk about in the podcast, but stuff we'd really like to get out there and show you guys what decks are being drafted. So definitely pay attention, and we're trying to upload more content as time goes on. Also, keep up with the YouTube channel because there are more content coming your way besides just the podcasts, which is exciting. So definitely a lot of stuff planned. I don't know. It's been a lot building up to this, right, Connor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know what either of us expected going in, but working on this for so long has been fantastic, and being able to put out more content is also a great time.
Definitely. So, I guess to take a step back now. So let's talk about what's been going on in our lives now. So, anything new happening with you, Connor? You want to share?
Been playing a lot of Hearthstone and Hearthstone Battlegrounds. It's kind of where I've been at lately. The newest set has been a ton of fun, actually. I've definitely been a detractor of Hearthstone in the past, and I've been an avid player of Hearthstone in the past, usually at the same time, but this time around, the game is just really fun to play, both in the main game and in Battlegrounds. So I've been having a great time with that. And I'm sure I can come up with some other stuff. But how about you, Andrew? What have you been into?
I was going to say, as the time this goes up, you are COVID vaccinated, right?
Yeah. Second vaccination as of the time this goes up. So very excited for that as well. I will be in like a semi-flu state when this goes up, most likely. So really looking forward to that. But I'm really, really excited to be vaccinated.
Yeah, I can say, because I was vaccinated in March, it is a relief now because it feels like everyone's finally getting to that point where the vaccines are being distributed. So eventually, in-person cubes will be a thing again. That's going to be pretty crazy. I don't think I've drafted a cube in person since St. Louis Regionals of last year.
Yeah, Yeah, it's been a long time.
So I'm definitely looking forward to doing that. As far as recently, I mean, Pokemon Snap just came out, so I've been playing that a ton. That game is a ton of fun. It brings back a ton of nostalgic memories for me because I really loved that game on the N64. And this has been a really good update to it. I mean, definitely like the core of the game is there, and the scenery looks amazing. So if you haven't checked out the gameplay or thought about purchasing the game for yourself, I definitely recommend it. It definitely adheres to like what I remember playing the game for, and it honestly brings a whole new like aspect to it with all the new Pokemon in there and the new regions to go explore. I just can't say good things about it. I'm like addicted to it right now, so I highly recommend Pokemon Snap. Tons of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I've definitely been looking into it, so I will put it up on my list. Another game that I've been playing a lot lately is Disco Elysium. It's a game that's been around for a while, but it or like I don't know, year or two or something like that. But got some more updates within the last year, and I bought it the first time because it was really really well regarded, really well reviewed. It had just won a bunch of awards, and it was just not what I was expecting, and I put it down and I didn't finish it. But this time I knew what I was getting into, and I picked it up, and I've been having a blast. The dialogue, the voice acting, the story, it's just a really fantastic game. And it's a blast to play. So if you are into a more story-driven, dialogue-heavy game, I would say it's basically entirely dialogue and exploration, then Disco Elysium is an amazing experience, and I would very, very strongly recommend that too.
I might have missed it if you said it. What system is that on? Is that a PC or?
So I'm playing it on PC. I don't know if it's on anything else. It's not hard on your system. Like you could run it on pretty mid-grade hardware and probably be fine. It's not super graphically advanced, but it is very aesthetically successful and interesting. And I don't know if I would say pleasing, because it's this kind of dystopian, washed out palette, very kind of hopeless feeling almost, but the goal is definitely to do that, and I think they do an absolutely excellent job. So I love it. I love listening to the sound. I love looking at the visuals, just because they're so cool and they're so effective, and they also don't put a huge strain on your system, which is great.
Yeah, that's always nice. I feel like there's a lot of games like that where it's just like under the radar, but like they end up being like really good games, and they aren't necessarily super graphics intensive, so you can like get away with like 2 gigs of GPU.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like that's the thing I never really have branched out, is trying like a lot of like the like RPG style type games like out there. I mean, I tried a lot of like the main ones. Like I've tried like Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, but I haven't like tried like a lot of the I don't know, would you call it indie? Like what would you call it? Like more of like a
I would definitely say like indie games are a very, very big thing right now. And there are just tons and tons of amazing ones. So here, pulling up my Steam real quick, just a couple of excellent. So if you're specifically looking for RPGs, Divinity Original Sin 2 is an extremely well-known and amazing RPG that you can play on the computer. I had a lot of fun with Hades. Hades was amazing. That's a roguelike, but it's like a story-driven roguelike, which is very different. Hollow Knight. I hesitate to call Hollow Knight an RPG. It's kind of like an action platformer, but
I have played Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a ton of fun. I definitely recommend it to anybody who hasn't tried it yet. It is like it's really, I don't think it's a very long game, right? I think
it's pretty meaty. I think I spent about 40 hours on it.
Okay, I'm thinking like it was like 100 hours. I didn't feel very long, and like as far as like RPGs go, but it was a good game. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I did most of the optional stuff, maybe all the optional stuff at the time the game was out, and I spent 46 hours on it. So that's a pretty good experience, especially because Hollow Knight does not have a AAA price tag. So really, really nice.
Oh, definitely. And it's available on like pretty much like a lot of systems, right?
Yeah, almost everything, if not everything at this point. So Outward is another indie game that I have loved. Now, this one is definitely not one that I recommend to everybody. It's very hard, unforgiving. The combat is clunky, but the atmosphere is absolutely incredible. The soundtrack is amazing, and it gives me kind of an unparalleled sense of adventure. And there's this suspense and fear around basically every corner, because your character is such a flimsy piece of garbage. You really, I don't know, it like things like darkness and just exploring feel threatening, and it's just very exciting to me. I think Outward's a phenomenal game, but it's definitely for a certain kind of person. If you don't like very difficult games, I would not recommend it. But it is an indie RPG. Risk of Rain 2, also not an RPG, but an excellent, excellent indie game. There's just tons of stuff. Really, I'm sure I could give you like hundreds of hours worth of recommendations. So
I have to say, like, the one that really I remember the most that I played, and I mean, it definitely is indie, but it's definitely also mainstream, is Undertale. Undertale has to be one of my favorite RPGs I've ever played. It has such a great story. It does so much with so little that I tend to like really appreciate like how that game was created. So if you haven't played Undertale, I definitely recommend that game. It's very cheap and you can run it on pretty much anything. I think a potato can run it. So that's something that's to be one of my favorite RPGs I've played in recent time.
Yeah, I did play that one as well. I played it pretty shortly after it came out. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was great. But yeah, it's interesting because when it came out, it was definitely an indie game, but it is technically by definition still an indie game. It is made by an independent developer. However, it is a very, very mainstream thing.
Like Sans is pretty much in Smash. So
yeah, he is absolutely. You know, the day that Steve from Minecraft would fight Sans in Smash is actually upon us, and that's a pretty wild experience.
Right, so you have to assume your game's garnered a little bit of attention to that point, if that's the case.
Absolutely. Oh, and one game that I would absolutely recommend. It's an indie game, got a bunch of accolades and awards, completely deserved them, is Celeste. That game
oh my gosh,
incredible.
Yeah. Dude, I love Celeste. Someone turned me onto it, like back when it like first came out. I got it on the Switch, and it is such a well-constructed game. It's more of it's a platformer, but it like tells such a good story, and you wouldn't expect that to like those genres to like really be that great in terms of like a vehicle for, you know, communicating like some sort of like story as it does. I don't want to spoil anything, but if you haven't played Celeste, the music is great, the story is great, the mechanics feel really tight and really, really like satisfying. So huge recommendation for Celeste from me.
Oh yeah, it feels amazing to play. Like the controls are so good. It's just so well put together. I do think that the last year or two have been really phenomenal examples of storytelling in mediums where you're not used to seeing them. So Celeste is like a precision platformer. It's not exactly a genre where you expect there to be any story, really, but especially not a very good one. And Hades is another example of that roguelike genre. I mean, the whole point of a roguelike is you're constantly dying and making new characters and going again. But in Hades, they have managed to literally drive the game through the story in tons of really unique ways. And they've taken advantage of their medium in such a cool way as well that, I don't know, I feel like the last couple of years have really been a breakout of that.
Yep, I definitely have to agree. So yeah, I'll have to give a lot of the games a try. I'd really have to try Hades. I feel like I'd really like that game.
I think you would really enjoy Hades, for sure.
So yeah, anything else you'd want to share before we wrap things up?
No, I think I'm all good.
All right. And then once again, thank you for everybody for the 80 subscribers. I mean, to us, that just means a million for us. That's just so I don't know, comforting to hear. It feels really nice to have people, you know, want to check us out. And the fact that there's growth, I mean, it's I don't know. It's a lot of love. We appreciate it. But I think that's going to wrap us up here. You've been listening to PQ, the one and only Pokemon Cube podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.